Have you ever caught yourself in the middle of a thought? Not a significant thought, not the kind of thought that announces itself with the weight of its own importance, but an ordinary thought. A thought about what to have for dinner, or whether you remembered to respond to a message, or whether the expression on a colleague's face this morning meant something about how they were feeling, or something about how they felt about you, and noticed in the catching something strange. Not about the content of the thought, about the fact of it, about the sheer, unremarkable, completely taken for granted miracle of the fact that there is something it is like to be you, having this thought, in this moment, in this specific configuration of consciousness that is yours and no one else's, and that you have never once, across the entire span of your life, had to choose to maintain. That the consciousness simply continues. That the thoughts simply arise. That the brain that is producing this moment of awareness of the brain, producing this moment of awareness, is doing so with a completeness and a continuity and a specificity of personal character that you did nothing to earn, that you could not stop if you tried, and that you understand if you are honest with yourself, almost not at all. If that strangeness is familiar, the strangeness not of the thought but of the thinking, not of the experience but of the experiencing, you have touched the edge of the question that Yuval Noah Harari regards as the most important and the most consistently avoided question available to any conscious human being. Not the question of what to do with the brain, not the question of how to optimize it, how to improve its performance, how to align its outputs with the objectives that the contemporary culture has designated as the appropriate objectives for a brain of one's particular type to be pursuing. The question of what the brain actually is. What it is actually doing when it produces the specific quality of experience that you inhabit continuously without ever quite understanding what you are inhabiting. How it changes in response to what influences and across what timescales and in what directions, in ways that determine not merely the efficiency of its information processing, but the actual quality of the consciousness that the information processing generates. And what understanding these things genuinely and honestly, rather than in the partial and convenient forms that the popular science of the brain tends to provide, actually implies about how a human life ought to be lived. The brain is the most complex structure in the known universe. This is not a rhetorical flourish. It is the considered assessment of the people who study it most carefully. 3 pounds of biological tissue containing approximately 86 billion neurons, each of which maintains connections with thousands of other neurons through synaptic junctions, whose total number across the entire brain is estimated in the hundreds of trillions. A structure of such extraordinary complexity that the full understanding of its operation remains genuinely beyond the reach of the most sophisticated scientific tools that human civilization has yet developed. A structure that generates, through processes that remain in their deepest dimensions, genuinely mysterious, the specific quality of conscious experience that you are having right now. The specific felt quality of being you. In this moment, aware of these words, processing these ideas, generating your response to them. Harari's approach to this structure is not the approach of the neuroscientist who studies its mechanisms in isolation from the larger questions of what those mechanisms mean for the beings who possess them. It is the approach of the historian who understands that the brain is not a static object but a historical one. That it was shaped by a history of evolutionary pressures extending across millions of years. That it is being reshaped, continuously and consequentially, by the cultural and technological environment of every era that inherits it. And that the understanding of what it is and how it changes is inseparable from the understanding of what it was designed for, what it is currently being asked to do, and what the gap between those two things is producing in the people whose brains are navigating that gap every day of their lives. To understand how the brain works requires understanding first what it was built to do, not what contemporary neuroscience uses it for, not what the educational systems of the modern world were designed to develop within it, what the evolutionary process was building when it assembled, across the span of millions of years, the specific architecture of the human brain in its current form? The answer to this question is not flattering to the romantic image of the human mind as the pinnacle of rational thought and the primary instrument of civilizational progress. It is considerably more humble and considerably more honest than that image suggests. The brain was built for survival, for the rapid, efficient, often inaccurate but consistently fast processing of environmental information in ways that increase the probability that the organism bearing the brain would survive long enough to reproduce. For the generation of the specific emotional responses, the fear, the desire, the social anxiety, the status-seeking, the in-group loyalty, and the out-group suspicion that kept the ancestral organism alive in the specific environment that the ancestral organism inhabited. For everything, in other words, that survival in a world of scarce resources, constant physical threat, and continuous social competition required. And not, except incidentally and as a byproduct of these primary functions, for the rational evaluation of evidence, the patient construction of accurate models of complex systems, the sustained engagement with abstract ideas over extended periods of time, or any of the other cognitive operations that the contemporary world most values and most rewards. This is the first and most important thing to understand about how the brain works. It is not a rational instrument that occasionally malfunctions in the direction of irrationality. It is a survival instrument that occasionally produces rationality as a byproduct of its primary function. The distinction matters enormously for the understanding of why the brain behaves the way it behaves in the specific conditions of the contemporary world. The brain that reacts to the news headline with immediate, intense, emotionally charged response before any deliberate evaluation of the headline's accuracy or significance has occurred is not a brain that is failing at its primary function. It is a brain that is succeeding at it. The immediate, emotionally charged response was precisely what the environment that built the brain required from it. In a world where the rustle in the bushes might be a predator, the brain that waited for calm, deliberative assessment before generating the fear response was the brain whose owner was eaten. The brain that generated the fear response first and evaluated the evidence afterward was the brain whose owner survived. The contemporary news headline is not a predator in the bushes, but the brain does not know this. The brain's threat detection system was calibrated for a world in which the most important information was information about immediate physical threats and immediate social threats in a small group of people with whom one shared a daily physical environment. It was not calibrated for a world in which the most important information is information about complex, abstract, geographically distant situations that have no immediate physical implications for the individual receiving the information. And the uncalibrated deployment of the threat detection system in the contemporary information environment produces the specific quality of response that characterizes most people's engagement with the news. The immediate, intense, emotionally charged, poorly calibrated, systematically distorted response of a survival system encountering stimuli that are not survival threats, but that are presented in formats, urgent, alarming, personally relevant seeming, that the survival system's triggers recognize as requiring the same quality of immediate response that genuine survival threats required. The second thing to understand about how the brain works is the specific way in which it constructs the experience of reality rather than simply receiving it. This is the insight that has been most consistently arrived at, through different routes and with different emphases, by the convergence of contemporary neuroscience, ancient contemplative traditions, and the philosophical traditions that have taken seriously the question of the relationship between the mind and the world it appears to perceive. The brain does not receive reality as a camera receives light. It constructs reality. It takes the raw input of sensory data and generates from that input a specific model of the world. A model that is shaped not only by the sensory data, but by the existing frameworks that the brain has developed for the interpretation of sensory data, by the expectations that previous experience has generated about what the sensory data is likely to mean, by the emotional states that the brain is currently in, by the social context that the brain is operating within, and by the evolutionary predispositions that the brain inherited from the long history of the organisms that preceded it. The world you experience is therefore not the world as it is. It is the world as your brain has constructed it, from the specific sensory data available in this moment, filtered through all of the interpretive frameworks, emotional states, social contexts, and evolutionary predispositions that your specific brain, in its specific current state, brings to the construction. This is not a deficiency of your brain. It is its most fundamental operating principle. The construction of a model of reality from imperfect information is precisely what the brain evolved to do, because in the ancestral environment, the ability to construct a predictive model of what was likely to happen next from incomplete information was more valuable than perfect accuracy about what was currently happening. The organism that could construct a useful predictive model fast was more likely to survive than the organism that constructed a perfect descriptive model slowly. But the constructive character of the brain's relationship with reality has profound implications that extend far beyond the understanding of perceptual accuracy. It implies that the quality of the model the brain constructs, the degree to which it accurately represents the actual character of the actual world, rather than the specific distortions that the brain's construction process introduces, is not fixed. It varies. It varies with the quality of the information that the brain has available to it. It varies with the emotional state the brain is in when it constructs the model. It varies with the frameworks and the expectations that the brain has developed through its accumulated experience of constructing models in similar situations. And it varies with the degree to which the brain has been trained, through specific practices and specific experiences, to recognize and correct for the specific systematic distortions that the construction process consistently introduces. This variability of the quality of the brain's model is the entry point to the most important question that Harari's analysis of the brain raises. The question of how the brain changes, how the quality of the models it constructs can be improved. What the practices and the experiences and the conditions are that produce the specific direction of change that a genuinely better brain, in the sense of a brain that constructs more accurate models and generates more adequate responses to the actual requirements of the actual situations it is in, requires. And what the contemporary environment is doing to the quality of the brain's modeling in the people who are navigating it, in ways that the people navigating it are often not aware of, and that the systems they are navigating it within have the strongest possible interest in preventing them from becoming aware of. The third thing to understand about how the brain works is the specific mechanism through which it changes. This mechanism is known, in the technical language of contemporary neuroscience, as neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity for structural and functional reorganization in response to experience. The specific property of the biological tissue of the brain that allows the connections between neurons to be strengthened or weakened, new connections to be formed and existing ones to be eliminated, and the functional organization of large regions of the brain to be gradually modified over time and in response to the specific patterns of activation that the brain's experience generates. Neuroplasticity is not a recent discovery, but its full implications for the understanding of how the brain changes and for the understanding of what the brain's continuous change means for the people whose brains are changing have been only gradually absorbed into the broader cultural understanding of what the brain is and how it works. The traditional view, which remained dominant in scientific and popular culture well into the second half of the 20th century, was that the brain's basic architecture was fixed by early adulthood, that the neural connections established during the critical periods of early childhood development were the permanent foundation of the adult brain's functioning, and that the adult brain was, in its fundamental structure, a finished product rather than a continuously changing process. This view was wrong. The adult brain is not a finished product. It is a continuously changing process. The neural connections that constitute the brain's functional architecture are being continuously modified by experience. Connections that are frequently activated are strengthened. Connections that are rarely activated are weakened and eventually eliminated. New connections are formed in response to new patterns of activity. And the functional organization of the brain shifts over time and in response to the specific patterns of experience that the individual undergoes in ways that produce genuine structural changes in the physical tissue of the brain, changes that are visible in the imaging technologies that contemporary neuroscience has developed for the examination of the brain's structure. Changes that correspond at the biological level to the genuine changes in the quality and the character of the person's cognitive and emotional functioning that experience, properly understood and properly directed, can produce. This means something very specific and very important for every human being's understanding of their relationship with their own brain. It means that the brain you have is not the brain you are stuck with. It is the brain that your experience to date has produced, and it is the brain that your experience from this point forward will continue to modify, in directions and at rates that are significantly influenced by the specific character of the experience you undergo and the specific practices you bring to the undergoing of it. The brain is not a static instrument that you deploy. It is a dynamic process that you are continuously, whether you intend to or not, shaping. And the quality of the shaping, the degree to which the direction of the change is the direction you would choose if you understood what you were choosing, depends on the quality of your understanding of the mechanism through which the shaping occurs. Harari's analysis connects the mechanism of neuroplasticity to the larger historical framework that his work consistently operates within. The mechanism of neuroplasticity is not new. It has been a feature of the human brain throughout the entirety of the evolutionary history that produced it. What is new in the specific conditions of the present moment is the specific character and the specific scale and the specific efficiency of the forces that are shaping the brain through the mechanism of neuroplasticity without the deliberate intention or the informed understanding of the people whose brains are being shaped. For most of human history, the primary shapers of the brain's development beyond the period of early childhood were the specific experiences that the individual underwent in the specific environment they inhabited, the physical labor of the work they performed, the social dynamics of the community they were embedded in, the cultural practices, the rituals, the stories, the forms of intellectual and creative and spiritual engagement that their culture provided, the specific demands of the specific skills that their social role required them to develop. These forces shaped the brain through the mechanism of neuroplasticity in the specific directions that the specific environment and the specific culture selected for. And the resulting brains, across the full diversity of the specific environments and cultures that human civilization produced, reflected the specific demands and the specific values of the specific contexts that produced them. What has changed in the specific conditions of the present moment is the emergence of systems of extraordinary sophistication for the deliberate shaping of the brain's development through the mechanism of neuroplasticity, in ways that serve the objectives of the systems doing the shaping rather than the genuine development of the people whose brains are being shaped. The most important of these systems, for the purposes of understanding the contemporary situation of the human brain, is the attention economy, the ecosystem of digital platforms and technological systems that has become, for a significant and growing proportion of the population of the developed world, the primary medium through which the experience that shapes the brain is delivered. The attention economy shapes the brain through the mechanism of neuroplasticity in a specific and consistent direction, the direction of increased reactivity and decreased sustained attention. Every time the brain responds to a notification with the specific quality of orienting response that the notification is designed to trigger, the neural circuits responsible for the orienting response are activated and strengthened. Every time the brain is redirected from the task it was engaged in to the new stimulus that the platform has delivered, the neural circuits responsible for task switching are activated and strengthened. And every time the brain is rewarded with the social signal that the platform delivers in response to the specific behavior that the platform requires for its functioning, the neural circuits responsible for the processing of social reward are activated and strengthened. The cumulative effect of this continuous